Well, hello and welcome. We are live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. You're watching the Week in Review. It's obviously the show where we take a look at some of those top stories that have made headlines and, of course, what has kept South Africans talking. I'm your host, Liesl Wilson. Let's get straight into it. Right, well, first up, the executive mayor of Johannesburg, Dada Morero, has announced the city's new mayoral committee. It follows last week's ousting of the DA's Mpopalatse, an motion of no confidence, which saw the collapse of the DA-led coalition. Now, the ANC took the reins through the election of Morero as the new mayor. Morero announced the new leadership in a media briefing early on.
To the residents of Johannesburg, I would like to assure you that this is not a power-sharing exercise, but the coming together of different skill sets, capabilities, and experience. Collectively, as different parties, we are united by the love we have for Johannesburg and its people. Today, we are honored to announce the executive leadership of Johannesburg. Let me begin by indicating the mix of leadership which includes young women, and different national groups. This leadership is as follows. Finance, Councillor Margaret Arnolds. Group Corporate and Shared Services, Councillor Loiso Masuku. Transport, Councillor Ashley Souls. Development Planning, Councillor Tapelo Amat. Housing, Anthea Natasha Leach. Economic Development, Councillor Nomoya Munisi. Health and Social Development, Councillor Eunice Mgcina. Community Development, Councillor Lubabalo Magwenju. Environment, Infrastructure and Service Delivery, Councillor Mpho Sesedinyani. Public Safety, Councillor Jack Sikwaila. The establishment of this mayoral committee of the City of Johannesburg is in line with all legal prescripts. The new MMCs will be sworn in on Monday, the 10th October 2022 at 10 o'clock at the Connie Bapela Council Chambers. Immediately after the swearing in, the entire mayoral committee will descend to El Rado Park to engage with the communities of El Rado Park so that we can contribute towards finding stability and peace in their community.
Meanwhile, in other news, Deputy President David Mabuza has admitted that if nominated by the ANC branches, he will accept the nominations to contest for the ANC presidency position. Mabuza was invited to address ANC branches in Ntabangulu in the Eastern Cape, where he refuted some of the media reports that he is teaming up with former President Jacob Zuma to garner more support from the branches. SABC News reporter Nkululeko Nyembezi has more on that story.
Thank you very much. We are coming live from Ntabangulu. Ntabangulu is under the region of the ANC Alfredo region, and now the Deputy President is here, who is supposed to be addressing some of the branches here, who are right now are singing, chanting, and dancing, and they also want to make sure that the vibe is on the higher level. We will listen to what is actually expected to be said by the Deputy President of the ANC. As I can see, just behind me, ANC members are getting inside. Some of them are singing. There are some of them who have been watching the space. But let me just briefly talk to the Deputy President right there. Deputy, thank you very much for your time. Welcome to the Eastern Cape.
Thank you very much.
You are here today. Can you just maybe briefly explain to us what is your visit all about?
Well, my visit is about our campaign as the ANC, the Zuma campaign, where we're trying to help the community in terms of services that we render as government. So like here today, I've just visited a clinic now Now, the clinic is running short of a lot of things, but things that we are able to do now, as we hear, we've just arranged that we should drill a borehole so that there's water in the clinic. But of course, a lot of things need the government to come and attend to those things, even the other clinics in the area. So we have requested that we get the profile of all the issues in the municipality and in the region, so that we attend to those. But this region, it's a very rural region. We are very poor, roads are not good, water services not good. So the best way that we can do to intervene is to try and drill some boreholes, get some graders to grade the roads. That's what we can intervene. But here we need a targeted and a focused program of government that will try and improve the lives of the people in these rural regions.
I know that people are interested to know that I am maybe in a position to accept nominations if branches nominate you as the president of the country, of the ANC in the country.
Well, like I said before, we as leaders of the ANC, we serve at the behest of our branches. We serve because our branches will nominate and choose us, and we should, in a way that it's showing humility to those people that recognize your ability, still need your service. We must accept nominations in whatever positions that you are deployed in as the ANC.
Then would you join maybe hands with the former President Jacob Zuma if given a chance to contest the top position?
Join hands how?
Join hands in terms of campaigning and all the stuff, because I understand that he also showed interest to be the chairperson of the ANC if given a chance.
Well, I'm not going to a campaign myself. All what I do, I serve the people. My being here, I'm not here to campaign, but this is the prerogative, sole prerogative of our branches to choose leaders on their own. They should not be disrupted. If they so wish to choose us to serve in certain positions, like I said, we are gladly very happy to accept those nominations. But I'm not going to join hands with anyone to campaign for any position.
But for sure, Deputy President, you must be very concerned about the high level of factionalism in the party.
Yes, we're concerned about that. I still believe where I'm sitting that these things will be attended to. It will be dealt with. I think we are all poised to deal with the foreign tendencies that have inflicted the organization. The degeneration of the organization is because of such tendencies that have become the mainstay in the life of the organization. Now, we must do something about that, and the ANC must make it a point that it adapts to the new environment and deal with the new problems, so that it's better able to serve the people.
Thank you very much, DP, for your time. Yeah, that was Deputy President of the ANC, David Mabuza. He had just arrived because we believe that he once visited one of the health centers here in Tabankulu, where he communicated and engaged some of the staff members about the issues facing that health center. Back to you to studio.
All right, thank you very much for that update. Another news now, SACP General Secretary Solly Mapaila Well, together with his counterpart, Duma Boko, President of Botswana National Front, delivered the Che Guevara lecture at the Maikeng campus of the Northwest University. On that note, we now cross to SABC News reporter Silwane Kakao, and she's joined by Madoda Sambata, the SACP Northwest Provincial Secretary. A very good afternoon to you, and thank you very much for joining us. Perhaps you can just give us an update. What is currently transpiring on your end ahead of the lecture?
Well, good afternoon to you and the SABC viewers. Indeed, the event has just started here in the venue right behind me. And the little change that has happened is that we heard that Solima Paila will not be coming today as we were expecting. And he will be replaced by the SACP National Spokesperson, Dr. Alex Mashilo. But we understand it is that lecture that you just spoke about, Che Guevara lecture rather. We just want to understand really what the lecture is about and also what the messages that will be conveyed today are all about. And I'm going to speak to the SACP Provincial Secretary here in the Northwest, Madoda Sambata, for that conversation. Thank you very much for joining us, Sambata. What is expected to happen today? Who is here? Just paint a picture for us firstly.
Today we are in an international solidarity week of the PEC of the SACP in Moses Kotane. We normally have this week concurrent with the days of Che Guevara, first day being the 7th of October 1959 when he became a minister in Cuba, and then the following days, the 8th being the day when his team was cornered and captured in Bolivia, where he was later killed, execution style, on the 9th of October. So this week for us, it's an international focus week, solidarity. We give solidarity to most socialist countries around the world, and we give solidarity to countries in the African continent. In the world, as we speak today, we already have the ambassador of Palestine, we have the ambassador of Venezuela, we have the ambassador of Cuba. So in the African continent, we have the Communist Party of Zimbabwe, we have the Communist Party of Swaziland. We also have BNF, Botswana National Front, represented by its president. So this day, Che becomes a glue of how we begin to understand the value of internationalist character of socialist revolutions, but value of international solidarity, because even our revolution in South Africa became a success on the basis that one of its pillars was international solidarity, which O.R. Tambo was leading. So as we speak of today, we're speaking of Che, the real person. We're speaking of Che, the revolutionary. We're speaking of Che, the internationals. The reason is, globally, we are competing on Che's pictures with those that are making money out of his face. And later, those that are buying only have no context of who Che is. This we're talking about a born Argentinian doctor who ended up in the revolution in Cuba, but had gone to more than 13 countries, including more than 2 in the African continent. As we know, he had to resign as a minister in Cuba, predominantly because he wanted to still lead a revolution in helping other countries and other continents to be free from bondages of exploitation. That's why he ended up in Bolivia, cornered, killed, and died.
In your view, why is it important, when we further expand, of course, on what you have said, which is quite a mouthful, a lot of details, interesting ones that you shared, why is it important for South Africans to know who Che is and to be celebrating or commemorating him today?
South Africans must begin to ask themselves, are they South Africa and South Africa only for South Africa? South Africans must come up to a discussion that South Africa is not an island. First, we are in the Sabc region. Secondly, we are in the African continent and therefore are part of the globe. No matter how our feelings are, we need to ensure that our revolution and development, it's not development that is in exclusion of the regions we are in, SADC, African continent, and the world. Because the world today, it's interlinked. We live in a globe. But this globe, it's a globe that is dominated by capitalist beliefs. That's why when we are here, we are raising a red flag for necessity, for socialist believers to come up and therefore speak for socialism. That's why the countries we are with are those that are practicing socialism. And if you check why we are in solidarity with them, the world organizations are not fair to the socialist countries. If you speak of Cuba, no resolution of United Nations has been implemented by United Nations on Cuba. Yet, in each year, UN votes in support of Cuba. No resolution whatsoever gets implemented. Palestine, as we speak now, people are preoccupied with Ukraine. All of a sudden, the longest oppression of the Palestinian people by Israel is put into periphery, also because of this capitalist dominance that United Nations is. As we speak of today, Venezuela is seen to be a problem, yet each time there's elections in Venezuela, Venezuelans vote for what they believe in. The world as we see, it's not the world we aspire for, because world must be a world of humanitarian stature. As we speak now, South Africa is not only seen to be getting back and not standing up on its international character, because countries that are still oppressed expect us to do more because they did support us. It's an obligation we owe humanity to international solidarity.
Just as we wrap up, what is the main message of focus today for this lecture?
The main message is unity of the people of the world, and it's unity of workers of the world. And the main message today is that communists exist to oppose exploitation of men by men, and that countries must be allowed to be independent, and countries must be allowed to celebrate and have a right of sovereignty. So a country that decides on a particular development, as long that development is a choice of the country, it must be respected by the world. It can't be that still today, United States is still having blockade on the Cuban revolution. It can't be still now that world support Israel against Palestine. It can still be now that Venezuelans would even be subjected to an element of foregoing their oil, which is dominantly #1 reserve in the world. So here as communists in Moses Kotane, we're arguing that choice of nations must be respected by world bodies, that development path of nations must be respected equally. If kids in Venezuela, in Palestine, when they are throwing stones on Israeli army, are declared to be terrorists, the same must be that whenever people in Ukraine are throwing stones on the Russian soldiers, they should be referred terrorists the same. Why Palestinians should be seen as terrorists? And anyone who is doing the same thing that Palestinians do against the Russian army is seen as a hero. It's also because the world today, especially world bodies, were calling on United Nations to stand up. And United Nations must be able to impose itself to nations as a relevant body to ensure that there's peace in the world. It can't be that others are allowed to break international law, yet others are not protected even when international law is broken against them.
Thank you very much there. Thank you very much for such a very detailed interview there. The Provincial Secretary of the SACP in the Northwest, Madoda Sambata, saying the focus today is to call for unity amongst workers and amongst countries. And with that, studio, it's back to you.
Silwana, thank you very much for that update. Our reporter, Silwane, obviously giving us just giving us an update ahead of the lecture, the Ernesto Che Guevara lecture that is currently taking place in Maikeng in the Northwest University. Just after having spoken to Madoda Sambata, the SACP Northwest Provincial Secretary, really echoing some of the relevance of what's transpiring today, his legacy, the importance of understanding Che Guevara's contribution to the world and geopolitics, why it's even relevant to South Africa, and really emphasizing the unity of workers. This obviously all comes 55 years after his death, as he also mentioned that Ernesto Che Guevara was killed execution style in Bolivia. And we'll continue to monitor that and see what transpires, but we'll leave the conversation there for now. And perhaps take a look at other political stories that have made headlines this week.
After Johannesburg Mayor Mpho Phalatse filed papers in the Johannesburg High Court to have the extraordinary council meeting held on the 30th of September, where she was removed as mayor declared unlawful. The matter is expected to be heard on Tuesday next week. The meeting elected ANC Johannesburg Regional Chairperson Dada Morero as new mayor of the city of Johannesburg. Phalatse says the DA will fight to the bitter end to ensure that the decision is reversed.
We will not stand by while the ANC and its allies use corrupt means to grab power. The people of the city voted out the ANC for a better alternative, and the DA will fight back until the bitter end to ensure that their mandate is served. We will focus our attention on regaining the city of Johannesburg and stop the ANC and its partners in the coalition of corruption from looting the city a second time and again paying no heed to the needs of our residents.
3 Limpopo MECs have been axed following a reshuffle by Premier Stanley Mathabata. The 3 MECs are amongst 5 who were not elected into the ANC Provincial Committee during the elective conference held in June. On Thursday, Panyaza Lesufi was elected as the 7th Gauteng Premier at the provincial legislature. He scooped 38 votes against 22 of the DA candidate Solim Simanga. Lesufi was the province's MEC for education. The Department of Correctional Services announced the official release of former President Jacob Zuma from parole as his 15-month sentence expired on Friday. The sentence stemmed from failure to appear before the State Capture Commission last year. Zuma was admitted to the Escort Correctional Center on the 7th of July last year, but was later placed on medical parole.
Well, the new Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi has replaced the province's health MEC, Nomathemba Mokgethi. She will be replaced by Gauteng Deputy ANC Chairperson, Nomantunkomo Raleoko. In announcing a reshuffled cabinet, Lesufi added that the health portfolio would now be known as Health and Wellness.
We've appointed the Deputy Chairperson of the ANC, Nomantunkomo Raleoko, to be the new MEC for Health and Wellness. Another challenge in health is financial management. They've got accruals, they're going through difficulties in terms of goods that are overpriced, in terms of many other things that are not taking place or are taking place in a manner that is questionable. So she's a former MEC for health, a former MEC for treasury, for finance. What we need, the department must be the department that must pay service providers within 30 days. It's the only department that is not doing that in the province. So because she has that experience of finance, we really believe she can go there and assist us and sort out all. Because if you don't pay service providers, you're not going to get service.
Well, for more, we are joined by Professor Sipho Siepe, a political analyst, who's going to weigh in on these and more stories. Prof, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon.
Look, on the back of the stories that just surfaced through the packages we just aired, I wonder if we can hone in on Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi. Was Lesufi the obvious choice for the ANC as Premier of Gauteng, given what is currently transpiring for the party at large?
The standard position of the ANC is that the party is a center of power. And if somebody is elected as a chair, what often happens is that person becomes a premier. And this avoids a situation of two centers of power, where you may have a chairperson, but the premier being somebody else. But of course, there are also arrangements that would happen, as you've seen also in KwaZulu-Natal, where despite the fact that the premier there is not the chair, but in the interim, the chair and the PEC have decided that it is in the interest of that province to make sure that you have people who are already familiar with being in that position. So it will differ from province to province, but the bottom line is that often the chair of the PEC in any ANC tends to assume the position of the premier of the province. But also, what is also important is that whenever there are elections, there will be consequences, and those consequences express themselves in what you call cabinet reshuffle. And when you look at the Gauteng, you also see that there was a reshuffle that comes as a result of elections, and some people lose positions. But there's also a retention of people who have been there. Somebody like Mama Bolo has been retained. Somebody who's also was competing with Panyaza Lesufi, Leboang Maile has been retained. And you have people like Faith Masibuko, who has been an MSC for a long time. So you have a new people, but you also have old people. But these are things that you expect in democracy. That democracy is also about the renewal, it's also about change.
Well, speaking about change and the consequences, I mean, we've seen now this cabinet reshuffle as well. And I wonder, as we look at, what we can anticipate from here, into particularly as we look at the needs of the city, service delivery, amongst other things, what do you make of the new Premier's plans for the city of Johannesburg for his tenure then?
Well, all premiers, and including the Gauteng Premier, when they take a position, they are very clear that there's a challenge of delivery. I mean, we have challenges with water, we have challenges with electricity, we have challenges with housing, you have dilapidation that takes place in the city. So the issue here is that the Premier must be seen to be assisting also the municipalities in terms of making sure that they're capable. Remember, if a municipality fails, then the law allows the province to take over. But here the approach is even before you take over, you make sure that there is a collaboration. Otherwise, you are going to end up where people taking you to court. We saw Tshwane under the DA when the Leboang Maile took a position to want to move into administration. They took the province to court. So there must be cooperation, which is something that is central to our constitution as well.
Yeah, speaking of which, as we look at, the newly elected Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi having announced his cabinet, and obviously, as you also alluded to, is made up of a mixture of new and familiar faces. What are your thoughts on this cabinet in terms of execution as well? Will the cabinet carry out the plans forward for Johannesburg, particularly as it is the economic hub?
Well, one needs to be a prophet or a sangoma to be able to make that determination of what will happen. What Panyaza Lesufi had said is that these are the challenges, and I've looked at the people with the particular skills and experience, and I brought them in. But you must also understand that there's also an element of political interest, and you also choose a team that you can work with, because there are people like Pak Tau who has been dropped.
Yes.
And therefore, people who have worked with him, they will tell you about somebody who's very capable. And what is unfortunate for him is that he was recalled as a deputy minister to come and assist the province in dealing with issues of economic development. And he has so far been removed. So these are things that when you look at the presentations, you have to understand that there are many things that affect that. It's not only skills, not only experience, but it's also issues of politics.
No, absolutely, Prof. And I mean, those chess moves continue. It's probably going to get more intense this as we head into elective conference come December. But let's park that conversation for now and also look at a few other stories. Another story that obviously made headlines, former President Jacob Zuma released from the system of correctional services. I wonder how you would weigh in on that. What is the likelihood of him perhaps even returning to prison to serve the remainder of his term, since the Supreme Court of Appeal's decision is also pending on whether the High Court was correct in their ruling? How would you weigh in on that?
I think the issue of the incarceration of President Zuma is an issue that must be of concern to South Africans. It doesn't matter how the Constitutional Court wants to frame it. What we had was a person who was incarcerated without a trial. And it was also through the insistence of somebody who is a Chief Justice today, who, when he was chairing, and President Zuma said, but I do have a problem with you because of the relationship that we have. And of course, some people argue that Jacob Zuma knew about those relationships. Yes, you would accept that. But when you start seeing that somebody is now becoming biased, you have a right to challenge that, to say, but you are now being too biased. And he asked for the refusal of the Chief Justice, or when he was the Deputy Chief Justice. And he refused, and President Zuma took the matter for review. But this matter was suddenly, what is a personal squabble, was escalated to becoming a constitutional matter. And you had the Constitutional Court that decided, because it was frustrated, to say this person must be imprisoned. So the lawyers and scholars will revisit this issue. This is why, after he was incarcerated, we end up with the July unrest, where people were expressing their sense of outrage. And we must be very clear here. When people express their outrage, it is about an outrage against what they see as an injustice. And they don't need the courts to tell them that this is unjust. We have been through processes as under apartheid, where people can see injustice from afar. They can smell it. And what the Constitutional Court did there was what people on the ground consider to be unjust. And most importantly, there is something called the view of an ordinary person, a reasonable person. Justice must be seen to be done. But when you have the courts that are seen to be abusing the platform, then the people would act the way they did. And it's also important to indicate that two of the judges who are members of the Constitutional Court were even clear that their colleagues had acted unlawfully and unconstitutionally. They say they allowed their frustration to take the better. So what we had there was an ego by some judges instead of them sticking to the issue of law. So this is why the release or the ending of this parole has been received with a lot of celebration on the ground. It's simply to say, how do you begin to justify what has happened? That the personal squabble becomes something the way you incarcerate somebody just because you as a Chief Justice or as a Deputy Chief Justice, you are very unhappy. And remember also during the interviews, the Chief Justice was exposed for inconsistency. While he was chairing the commission, he claimed that he does not have any relationship with Jacob Zuma. But when he appeared running for the position of Chief Justice, Malema put him on the spot. And suddenly the Chief Justice owned up to the fact that he has a good relationship and a long-standing relationship with Jacob Zuma. And they even had meetings which were pointed out to him. And conveniently, he even forgot what the discussions of those meetings were. So this is a matter that ultimately will have to look at. But we cannot have a situation where we bring a party through the back door, where people are going to be imprisoned because some judges are frustrated. We cannot have detention without trial.
You know, Prof, thank you very much for weighing in on that. I mean, obviously, the future of the former statesman really has now come, back into the fore. Perhaps also the more legal woes that he faces. Again, there's another court battle also coming in this week. But just for the interest of time, I'm going to also have to leave that story there and just quickly move on to Limpopo province, where Action SA in Limpopo, a few others also having come out to criticize Premier Stan Matabata's latest cabinet reshuffle as well. How would you weigh in on that? With some of the view that it's making room for more corruption?
Well, it's easy to make allegations against other people, but what you saw there is that the people who have been removed were people who were no longer elected in the last provincial elections of that province within the ANC. So like I say, whenever you have elections, there'll be consequences. Elections are there to make sure that there's a renewal and also that there are new people. So what Stanley Matabate has done is to bring people that he feels are his team and that they also enjoy political support. What political parties are saying is what they normally say, that they will always be in opposition. And they may be correct, but we don't know that. And what they need to do is that if they feel that somebody is corrupt, we have law enforcement system in this country where you go and open a case against those people that you're accused of corruption. But simply making allegations against people is not sufficient.
Prof, as always, I wish time was not a factor, but we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thank you very much for joining us here on the SABC, weighing in some of those big stories, again, much of which continues to be a developing story. But Professor Sipho Siepe, a political analyst, again, thank you very much to him for his time. Let's take a quick ad break and continue with more news and updates on the other side. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Welcome back. The Weekend Review continues with myself, Liesl Wilson. In other news now, Eskom ended a record unbroken stretch of rolling blackouts at 5 this morning. It said it was anticipating lower demand at the weekend and had built up adequate emergency generation reserves. The power utility said a generation unit at each of 7 of its power stations had been returned to service, whilst a generating unit at the Duba power station had been taken offline for repairs. Eskom has warned that its generation capacity remains constrained. Meanwhile, the South African Transport and Allied Workers Union, SATAU, and the United National Transport Union says that efforts to establish picketing rules with Transnet management for Monday's planned national strike have been unsuccessful. Unions say Transnet's breaking the requirements of the Labour Relations Act by refusing to establish picketing rules. The Labour Court just yesterday dismissed an urgent interdict application by Transnet to have the strike declared unlawful and even unprotected.
The employer Transnet's bid to halt the strike action has proven to be unsuccessful, with workers' unions Untu and SATAU are saying they're now united and resolute on an impactful downing of tools come Monday. Transnet operates South Africa's freight rail network and all the country's ports. The strike action has the potential to affect economic activity across many sectors. The two unions boast over 50,000 workers at the company. The unions say the strike on Monday meets all the labor relation requirements. The workers are demanding a 12% salary increase, while the employer is offering 4%.
As SATAU, we did everything through the bargaining council for the attention of the employer. We made sure that we gave the employer the 7-day period. We also made sure that the employer is given the 48-hour notice. We also sent our picketing rules to the employer.
In Cape Town, workers heeded the call to down tools, with more demonstrations expected on Monday.
We know that even if we get in salaries, but most of us, our salaries are so low.
The workers at Transnet have taken the opportunity to also slam the employer over that move to apply a force majeure process, which they say amounts to the company evading taking responsibility. The unions say this is not surprising, as the employer has been negotiating in bad faith.
It is not a good faith bargaining characteristic to start threatening employees when they exercise their democratic and constitutional rights to strike.
The workers now have the green light from the courts over the downing of tools and are hopeful that this will force the hand of the employer to give in to their wage demands. Katleho Logodi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, the closing date for public submissions on the General Laws Amendment Bill is Monday, the 10th of October. This is a bill that seeks to bolster the country's anti-money laundering and also combating terrorism finance rules. It may be too late in the day. South Africa faces the real prospect of actually being grey-listed. This is within the purview of a global body, the Financial Action Task Force. In October 2021, the FATF found that South Africa was lacking in the area of dealing with money laundering and the combating of financing terrorism.
One of the major findings of the Financial Action Task Force was the country's law enforcement agencies' poor score in terms of investigating anti-money laundering and combating terrorism financing crimes. While there have been questions as to why those identified to have been involved in the state capture era have not yet been prosecuted. This month, South Africa is being reviewed by the Financial Action Task Force on its progress in addressing its approaches to anti-money laundering and the countering of financing terrorism. In 2021, it found that the country complied with only 3 out of 40 benchmarks set. It's only recently that National Treasury has tabled a comprehensive bill that looks to ensure that the legal framework of the country stands ready to deal with these ills. The bill seeks to have these laws amended. The Trust Property Control Act, which falls under the Justice and Correctional Services Department. The Non-Profit Organisations Act, under the Social Development Department. The Financial Intelligence Centre Act, which is the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance. The Companies Act, which falls under the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Competition. And the Financial Sector Regulation Act, which is the purview of the Ministry of Finance. But the Financial Action Task Force decides in February next year whether South Africa should be grey-listed or not.
There has been some notable progress that has been made, but I think National Treasury also had admitted that they were trying to address some of these shortcomings, but the timelines are quite too tight. So I think we can expect a miracle at the end of the year in Feb, but more likely than not, our view is that we would be grey-listed.
If the FATF decides to grey-list South Africa, there will be immediate negative economic impacts for the country.
I think if you look at other countries that have been grey-listed, the estimation is that it probably has an impact of about 1% of GDP. That's something that South Africa can ill afford. I don't think any South African really escapes this.
A negative ruling by the Financial Action Task Force would compound an already difficult economic operating environment.
It raises the cost of doing business in the country, especially for companies that have trading partners globally. And that also impacts some transfers of capital. It also has a negative impact on capital flows.
Most people seized with the grey-listing issue, even the likes of National Treasury and the Financial Intelligence Centre, have assumed the worst, that South Africa will not be able to dodge the grey-listing bullet come February. But if that does happen, other countries have shown that it is possible to rectify the issues and come out of the grey-listing status. The only question is, will South Africa have the focus to implement the strategies put in place to do the same quickly?
When Mauritius was blacklisted, you're right, it took 20 months for them to come off. I think it was, one of the quickest turnarounds, but everyone got behind, government, private sector, and, they ensured that they did what was necessary. If you look at other countries, take Pakistan as an example, they've been on and off the grey list for over a decade. And, they've met all but one of the requirements that the Financial Action Task Force laid out for them, and they won't take them off. So it is going to be difficult if you think that we've only complied at the initial review with 3 out of 40.
South Africa can ill afford to be grey-listed for a long period, as that will impact on its ability to trade with counterparties. It will also likely see consequences such as the further weakening of the local currency. which is inflationary and won't augur well for capital investment in the country, which will derail the country's plans for economic growth and the much-needed job creation that would come with it. Nampumelelo Siziba, SABC News, Johannesburg.
En route to communities in northern KwaZulu-Natal believe the delays in the construction of the Isandlwana Heritage Precinct is depriving them of economic development and opportunities. The area is home to Isandlwana, the site of the AmaZulu Regiment's historic victory over a British army back in 1879. Locals say not much has been done to honor the memory of the gallant warriors and even the soldiers who fought in the historic Battle of Isandlwana. The site only has a museum built by the British a few years after the war and a grave site for the fallen soldiers.
Isandlwana Heritage Precinct project, an idea conceived to keep alive the memory of Anglo-Zulu War of 1879. Locals and traditional councils admit that the historic site, which only has a small Isandlwana battlefield museum, does not do justice to the fallen warriors who defended their kingdom against the British invasion. In 2014, government made commitments to help build a heritage precinct that will include a cultural village, war memorial, a museum, and a monument of peace and other amenities. Non-profit organization Kwa Culture is spearheading the project. More than 10 million rands has been invested in the project, yet only the foundation work has been done. The money is said to have been spent in developmental phases, which cover the feasibility study, environmental impact assessment, and consultation fees. Local Traditional Council Amangwe Butanani says the construction of the project has been marred by delays, which has deprived locals from reaping economic spin-offs.
It's a historical site, and if these things were done a long time ago, I think this area would be in a better space of providing more job opportunities to the locals and even to the broader society of KwaZulu-Natal. And I think really, I don't know what was the held up, but I think the attention was not there, or the desire from the previous governments to develop this area to where it's supposed to be.
The museum receives about 3,000 visitors annually. Locals believe not much has been done to tap into the area's full tourism potential, which will in turn benefit them. She says Isandlwana area has rich history, but as the locals, they don't benefit anything from it. She says they'll be happy if the area is also of beneficial to them, especially for their children to get employment. She says they also need this to be properly developed so that during the annual commemoration day, they will have shelters for them as hawkers.
So we need to start now becoming more modernized at the same time, and also think that these people, because they are putting money for them to come in, that also we should be rolling up the red carpet for them when they come in here, because in the end it's them who are spending money on this particular battlefield ground. At the same time, yes, if there is an idea of putting a big structure, a big museum, I think it's going to be good as long as it can serve the purpose of educating, nation building.
Meanwhile, the late AmaZulu King Goodwill Zwelithini and the new British monarch King Charles III are understood to have made an undertaking that will see weapons and other artifacts reportedly taken by the British soldiers during the war being returned to the country upon the completion of the Heritage Precinct. The Department of Arts and Culture in KwaZulu-Natal has ignored SABC News queries on the matter. Vusi Khumalo, SABC News, Isandlwana in Ngqutu.
Right. ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa is in the Free State for the ANC's Zuma campaign. The campaign focuses on improving the delivery of basic services, and his visit comes at a time when branches of the ANC are preparing for the Free State ANC conference. On that note, let's take you live there.
For honoring 1 year, Arsenal do early listing for 20 years. 20 years. Premier Kari. I can put a happy one at about the Leona Analyst to high. By last week, or not, more ba thabile hona ba be ba ntshuna kaofela ba be ba thabile jwale ke a bona jwale wa hantle ke fumana keys ba bona tshedi ya jwale ba bang ba ntse ba no president le rona re batla ho suna ke re ake le be kae mme la be mane wile a potsa re jwale a ko ntlhalosetsane wena o tsamaya ho suna basadi ba bang nna jwale o tsetsa jwang ka nna jwale mmuso ona wa ANC ka nnete o ikemiseditse hore re lokise moo ho senyahetseng teng le moo ho senyahalang teng re lokise re etse hore batho ba heso ba phele hantle ba be le bophelo bo betere ho feta bane ba kgale so ke kopa hore le ska fela pele ha ntho tse ntle di soka di atumela ho wena o ska fela pelo o be patient ka hobane ANC tla fihla le ho wena e tla o etsetsa ntho tse ntle ha ke re ho jwalo ke batla hore le utlwisise hantle ke lebohe hape le lona ba mona ba le di-volunteer ANC hantle le program ena ya rona ya letsema re di-volunteer kaofela re volunteera nako ya rona re volunteera mesebetsi ya rona hore ANC e tswelle pele ka hobane ka nnete batho ba heso mona South Africa a bana tshepo e nngwe ka ntle le ANC. The ANC is our only hope. There's no other hope. O ka di sheba ka diphathinyana tsena a hona party e ka atumelang ho ANC ka mesebetsi ya yona ra dumela hore moo le moo yes re ile ba etsa diphoso ho bile ha ba le diphoso moo le moo ha ba le ba bang ba utsitseng ditjhelete ba bang ba sa sebetsang hantle empa yona ANC ka sebele ke mokgatlo o ikemiseditseng hore o ntlafatse maphelo a batho ba rona so ke kopa hore le ska fela tshepo lona ba le di-volunteer le tswelle pele le mesebetsi ya ho sebeletsa ANC program ena ya rona ya letsema e tswelle pele letsema ko etsa hore re sebetse mmoho kaofela rona re etse hore ANC e kene setjhabeng re lokisetse dikgetho tse tla bang teng ka 2024 ka 2024 o tlo ba o le dikgetho tse fetang dikgetho tsohle ka bane diphathinyana tsena tse ding di nahana hore di tlo hlola ANC ene ke batla ba jwetsa jwale ANC ka se hlolwe hohang ANC tlo wina dikgetho tseno ene ke lona ba tlo etsang hore ANC win so ka mantswe ano ngiyabonga kakhulu ukuba lapha phakathi kwenu ngibonge futhi kubona ama-volunteer a-ANC keleleboe kaofela le batjha hore le bona ba atumela ho ANC ke a leboha le saleng hantle manda wesithaba councillor
Right, ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa in the Free State, just on the back of him having addressed the crowd. This is as the ANC's Letsima campaign is currently taking place. Again, the campaign really focusing on improving the delivery of basic services within the area. But as it's finished there, we're going to leave it there for now. Of course, we are back tomorrow for a look at the week ahead. But from myself, Hazel Wilson, and the rest of the team, until then, do take care. It is goodbye for now.